Salamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining. Uh, I feel like there's a little bit of a. So I think there's a bit of a. Oh, okay, miscommunication. On Instagram. Sorry about that, everybody. Assalamu alaikum again, and welcome to our event tonight. And I would like to thank everyone first and foremost for joining us. My name is Heather Rizvi, and I will be hosting tonight this event on behalf of APSA Network. A little bit about me is that I'm a junior studying at Southern Connecticut State University. My major is criminal justice, and I also serve as APSA Network's networking head for the East Coast. I should be joining Instagram in just a second. Just give me one moment. Seems we're having some connection issues. Okay, I'm just going to start the program with the recitation of Surah Al-Hamd. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin arrahmanir rahim maliki yawmiddin iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in ihdinas siratal mustaqim siratal ladzina an'amta 'alaihim ghairil maghdubi 'alaihim waladdallin. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. With that, I would just like to get a bit into the event. before we go. Our event today will be on mental health and spirituality. Mental health isn't an easy topic to be broached and within our community, and it is often looked at as something that is separate from spirituality and religion. And this event's purpose is to find some overlapping facts between mental health and spirituality and how they impact each other. I already talked about myself a bit, so I'm just going to get into the introduction for our speaker who has so kindly joined us today for this event, who is Sister Barak Hussain. She is a Canadian Iraqi registered psychotherapist practicing at the Health and Counseling Services at Carleton University for the past 13 years, where she helps students from all sorts of backgrounds through issues ranging from anxiety, depression, stress, culture shock, the ability to identify challenges, suicide, relationship issues and abuse, and more. And with that, I would like to get into the event. Sister Barak can begin whenever she's ready for a quick introduction for the topic that she will be getting into first. And yep, that's all for me right now. Thank you, everyone.
Salamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, everybody's doing well. Sorry, we've had a few technical issues, but I think we're up and running now. Those of who were on Instagram, we're going to ask you to just come join us on Facebook as well as YouTube, The Muslim Counselor, because it just wasn't working there. We'll see if we can try in a bit, but at the moment, we're just going to stick to YouTube and Instagram. So funny, we were all prepared and ready, but subhanAllah, the internet just wasn't working, even though we're here in North America. Alhamdulillah wa shukr. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. In his name, I begin with the blessings upon the holiest of Prophet, our beloved Abul Qasim Muhammad and his beloved family. When we talk about mental health, like the brother was saying, it's not an easy topic to discuss as there's so many different taboos and misconceptions around them, especially within diverse as well as faith-based communities. I have a bit of an allergic cough. I think I'm allergic to my cat now, so I'll be coughing. No worries, it's nothing to do with the pandemic, just allergies. So just apologies ahead of time. Again, as we were saying, alhamdulillah, when it comes to the topic of mental health, we can say that over the last 5 years or so, there has been a little bit more awareness within our communities as people have started to realize how important it is to talk about mental health, to look at the misconceptions and work around getting rid of them, talking about shameful things, shameful or taboo, so that there is more understanding. And one of the ways of doing that we've been doing, whether through the medium of the Muslim Counselor or with my Serenity Islamic Mental Health Awareness team, is to bridge the connection between our faith as well as psychology and mental health and wellness. And when we take a look at this connection, we can see that there is in fact a huge connection, right? That our faith is based on principles that have to do with the nafs, the self. And when we look at the word psychology, it is actually broken down in the literal sense of the study of the self, of the soul. So right there, you see the connection, because there's a lot in our faith that has to do with the 3 phases or different parts of the self: nafs al-mutma'inna, nafs al-ammara bis-su', and nafs, I always forget one of the 3, but I have a slide here. We'll take a look at it in a second. So when we take a look at that, it's really important to understand this, right? And when we look at these 3 parts and how they're connected to God, so again, it's nafs al-mutma'inna, nafs al-lawama, and nafs al-ammara. And so it's the peaceful self, the lower commanding self, and of course, the self-reproaching part of you. And these are all connected in terms of the relationship to God. So we'll get into a little bit further when we take a look at spirituality and the beautiful questions that we have ready for the discussion today, inshallah. We'll get into more depth in terms of looking at what is the connection. Now, I've found over the years when we discussed these connections, whether it's talking about the different parts of the self, whether we're looking at spiritual treatments as part of the healing and treatment of mental disorders or mental illnesses, excuse me, we can see how important they are in terms of having that overall lifestyle balance, including spirituality. And we'll take a look closer at that in a bit in terms of exploring what, sorry, it means. See, I'm all ready for this. We've gotten, we have our tea here in our Imam Ali cup. So we've got modern medicine, so to speak, with spirituality. So we've got that already there starting. So it can also definitely help with our physical health, not just our mental health. So again, as I was saying, when we use the language that people understand when it comes to, let's say, the symptoms of depression or anxiety, rather than saying you are anxious, you are depressed, et cetera, people connect more with, let's say you were fatigued, you were sad, you're not as engaged as you were before, you're constantly worrying about things. When we use this terminology, people are more likely to connect with that. So same thing when we connect words from our faith and our spirituality, when it connects to wellness and spiritual health. And there, like I said, there's a huge connection there, and people are more likely to connect that way, with these concepts of psychology, with the ideas around mental health and mental illness. So it's really important to understand the difference between the two. Mental health has to do with our overall wellness, our overall balance, right? And when we take a look at mental illness, it's what happens to you when you don't take care of your mental health, or when your mental health is off, right? So sometimes it could be off, not necessarily because you're not taking care of it, just could be part of genetics. And we'll take a closer look at that as we move along. So it's a little bit of a mini intro in terms of, inshallah, what we're exploring this evening, and taking a closer look at the connection between spirituality and mental health, how to incorporate that into your daily life, and really truly understanding that there is, in fact, a deep connection between mental health as well as spirituality and how we can encompass it daily.
Sorry about that. Now we're going to be getting into the layout of the rest of the event, which will be largely consisting of the questions we have. And sister, if it's okay, would you just like me to ask the questions in the order we have, or did you want to begin with any particular question?
You can go ahead and start.
Okay, wonderful. We're going to be just starting with the question that was sent in, and one that we decided to pick out of the ones that we had available. This question goes like, I understand that mental illnesses are from chemical imbalances in the brain, but what are the root causes, especially considering that mental illnesses have been on the rise, or have they been on the rise?
When we take a look at this question, it is very important to understand that the root causes can be from chemical imbalances, but that's not the only thing. You've got genetics, like we said, there's chemical imbalances. There's also life experience, right? There's also past trauma that can also be part of that. There's unhealthy lifestyle, there's drugs and addictions. There are so many different factors when it comes to having mental illnesses. So it's really important to understand that it's not just one thing. When it comes to chemical imbalance, that's one of the many causes that you could say of different mental illnesses. So when we take a look at depression, for example, you could be fine your entire life. You could be doing well in school, good interactions with families, you going to work, et cetera, you're getting good grades at school. But then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you find yourself feeling very disengaged or very sad, or having really harmful thoughts about yourself and not caring about others, and so on and so forth, right? So in addition to that, it could be that it could be a genetic factor in this case, or a chemical imbalance. Does that make sense? So at this point, it could be because that person has had a trigger that triggered the chemicals in their body in their brain, so to speak, to elicit these responses. And so part of the treatment would include medication to help put the chemical imbalance back in balance, so to speak. Does that make sense?
I think that fully covers that question and answers it adequately. Think that's it for that one then. The next question we're going to be getting into.
I just want to say for people who are joining on Facebook and YouTube, please do pose your questions, and we can definitely take a look at your questions and put them in here for sure.
Absolutely. And without further ado, I think we'll just get into the second question, which is going to be, what is the Islamic approach on how one can better their mental health? In Western cultures, we have a lot of different approaches, and I'm curious on how they compare to the Islamic way.
So what question number was that again?
That was question number 2.
Did we not switch that one?
I might not have the switch version on me. I'm sorry. It's talking about the Islamic approach on how one can better their mental health.
Sorry, can you repeat the question again?
Yeah, of course. The question goes, what is the Islamic approach on how one can better their mental health? In Western cultures, we have a lot of different approaches, and I am curious on how they compare to the Islamic way.
Okay, so when we look at the Western approaches of dealing with mental health, and this was a topic that's very close to me in terms of the research that I did as a student. I think this was a question, right? Yeah. So this was almost the specific question I took a look at in my studies as a student researching this in my graduate studies. And I recall at the time the professor in our micro theories class was talking about all the Eastern theories out there in psychology and the Western. And I said, hold on a second, you jumped over the middle. The Middle East section. He goes, that's what you're going to study, and that's what you're going to show us in terms of your research. I was disappointed at first because I had come into university, or rather my graduate school, with the ideas already in my head that I was going to further expand on my undergrad studies on Dr. Viktor Frankl, who was huge on spirituality and mental health. And he was a Holocaust survivor, and he did a lot of research almost qualitative research while he was imprisoned in the concentration camps, where he took a look at how the prisoners engaged with their environment and how they survived. And it was through meaning, through suffering, and their connection to God. So of course, as a Muslim, I really connected with that. And that's what I wanted to research further in my graduate studies. But then my prof said, no, you're going to research further in terms of what there is in the Middle East, so to speak. So that would encompass, in this case, the Islamic approach. So as I began my research, I found that we hardly had anything meaning translated, because as soon as I started digging into it, and the last decade or more, I'm not going to give the exact number, when I can, continued on my work on this path, I realized there's so much from our Islamic approach and our Islamic concepts when it comes to psychology and Islam. So some of the approaches that we have from the Western point of view are very secular, right? They don't encompass God. They don't encompass a balance of God in our lives. And when we take a look at the Islamic approach, that is exactly what it's all about. I'm going to pull up a slide here. And just give me a moment. I'm going to put that slide up here in terms of understanding this idea when it comes to the different theories that we have there when it comes to psychology, but also when it comes to this specific question. Just give me a second. So I'm going to pop that in there. And of course, it's not going to show the way we want it to show, even though I had that ready earlier. So give me a second. I'll get that going. Bismillah. We seem to have a lot of fun technical issues today, huh?
Too many.
Okay. By the way, when I did that, did you see the entire screen as that?
Yeah.
The entire screen.
So try that again.
You see the entire screen right now?
Yeah, the entire screen is up there.
Okay, perfect. So what you see here is when we take a look at, and this is actually from my studies that I did in terms of Islamic counseling and theories to be able to put into practice for like clinical use. What we see here is that when we look at Islam, spirituality is a way of life for us, whereas religion and spirituality is the same thing, or they should be the same thing, right? When we look at Western psychological theories, they focus only on one aspect of the self. So for example, when we look at psychoanalysis, it is the unconscious that it focuses on. Cognitive psychology looks at thoughts and processes. Behavioral psychology looks at behavior. So when we look at the newer, more integrated, so to speak, therapies, they've attempted to bring in the spiritual. So we have the existential humanistic psychology, where they explore more of that spirituality. When we look at Islamic theories, we know it is to understand the self. And this requires a study of the spiritual aspect of the self, right? And the fundamental question when we look at spirituality in psychology from an Islamic perspective, it's about relating to man's existence. And these are the questions such as where have we come from, what is our purpose in life, and what happens after we die, right? And we know this has to do with the definition we see here in terms of the Arabic word of Islam, which means salam, peace, right? To be peace, submission, or surrender. In other words, to be at peace with oneself and submit yourself to God. And so we continue this in terms of the nafs. When we look at Islamic theories, again, we mentioned here this earlier, the self or the soul that's mentioned in the Quran. It could be good or evil, and we know there are different types, but there are three that are described by scholars to be the main ones. Like, these are the ones we mentioned earlier. So nafs al-ammara, the commanding lower self, nafs al-mutma'inna, the peaceful self, and the nafs al-lawama, the self-reproaching self. So we see here in the Quran that this self here is prone to the lower aspects, which represents the negative drives. And it can be viewed when you compare it to for the Freudian concept of the id of, I want it now, I don't care if it's right or wrong, this is what I'm going to do, I don't care. Which corresponds to the self when it becomes aware. So the consciousness here, right? And it feels remorse. And this is what we look at in terms of the first major step in psycho-spiritual growth. So this, let's just go back to that. This is parallel to the Freudian concept of the superego. So, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Why did I do that? I wish I hadn't. Has that ever happened to your brother Haidar? Have you experienced that before?
Yeah, I feel like there's a point in everyone's life where they feel like oh, I shouldn't have done that, possibly, whether it's like as a child or some high pressure decision making you have to make in your adulthood. So
Yeah. By the way, we are both on screen while this, I just can't see it. Just the screen is there. So just FYI. Moving on
yeah.
here, the third, because I can't see it. I only see it. I just left the technical stuff. There's a way to do it, but I just, for the sake of just going smoothly right now, I'm just gonna leave it like that. Doesn't matter if I can't see. Yeah, as long as we can see this, alhamdulillah. So the nafs al-mutma'inna here, the peaceful self, this talks about the inner self of happiness when you feel satisfied and content. The nafs al-mutma'inna, right? So the desired state that we are aiming to achieve. And this is what we call the highest state of the spiritual achievement. So in order to achieve this state, you have to activate that remorseful self. So in that nafs al-mutma'inna, you have the jihad in nafs. I'm sure you've heard this term again and again in terms of the struggle of the self, especially against al-amara, and within the amara to get to that mutma'inna. So you see here with these concepts, when we take a look at this aspect here, I'm just going to remove it for now. So understanding, of course, this is a tiny little bit of what is out there now compared to 15 years ago when I first took a look at this. We had loosely translated books on these topics. It was really hard to understand and put into a graduate study. But what I did is I ended up doing that. I had articles here and there, but it wasn't what we have now. We have full conferences. In fact, there is the Muslim Mental Health Conference happening this weekend. If you just find that on Facebook, you can join a 2-day conference. Usually we go in person. This year, of course, is online. We have full conferences like that. We have journals, the Journal of Muslim Mental Health. I didn't have that back in the day when I was researching this, when we wanted to understand this more. But now you see all these sophisticated types of research that is done out there. And what I have done is just had a basic fundamental introduction to the ideas that we have so much more research on now. And of course, because Islamic studies are also more accessible in the English language now, there's so much more out there from the Islamic studies, for example, the Hausa and so on and so forth. So a lot of people have access to material that we didn't have back then to understand this a little bit better, right? So when we want to understand our mental health better and we look at this concept of the self, right, it really helps us put it together in a way that is more connected to our own beliefs. So many concepts that we look at when we want to compare them, and I'll quickly just go over them in terms of what I usually talk about in these types of presentations. So I'll just pop it back up on the screen so we can take a look at that. One second. Okay, so right here on this slide, sorry, one second. So do you see that? No, not this one. You gotta love this technicalities. Okay, one second. It's showing the wrong one. There we go. Bismillah. There we go. That's what I wanted to show to begin with. Now I can see it all. All right. So what you see here, these are the major constructs or concepts of Islam that is related to counseling. I got into the deeper aspects of it in terms of the three parts there. We looked at spirituality, the definition of Islam, and the three parts of the self. I'm not going to get into this because that's a whole other presentation, but these are the concepts that I encourage you to read more about, to listen to other lectures from Islamic scholars who describe these. And when you listen to it from an Islamic perspective from the scholars, then you can connect it to what we talk about here. So there's also the free will and choice, that there's so many philosophical and spiritual discussions around that. There's balance and development, and there's the fitra, the nature of motivation, okay? I also like to get into, perhaps in the future we can do more on this topic. We'll take a look at how behavior changes, right? How learning occurs. And we can also take a look at different various goals of treatment. I know we're going to touch upon all of this here and there, but these are usually the things that we take a look at when we look at how we can approach our mental health from this aspect. Does that make sense so far? Does that answer that question, do you think?
I actually think, yeah, that answers that question. And then you did a very nice job, like going above and beyond to like weed out any potential like follow-up questions that might have to do with that particular question initially. So thank you for that. And then with that, I think we'll get into the next question. This question asks, where is the boundary between mental health and daily ups and downs in mental/emotional health? And can spirituality help in both situations?
So again, to understand mental health, we need to understand mental illness. When we took a look at mental health, it's the overall balance, right? Mental illness is when you're off track, when you don't take care of yourself properly, you can fall into those illnesses, just like you would physical illnesses. Right now, we're living in a pandemic where there's so many restrictions to help spread the virus, right? The hand washing, the sanitation, the mask, to moving away from people, et cetera, to stop the spread. When we look at other illnesses as well, we take the precautions to make sure we don't get physically ill, right? So same thing here. The ups and downs have to do with that balance. If you're off balance for a long period of time, then you're more likely to fall into that mental or emotional down, right? So spirituality can help, I would say, but it also depends on how much you believe it's going to help you. All right, it's almost that almost like that placebo effect as well. So having a bad day, you know, how can you shake that off? or people tell you, get over it, and that's not going to help you. Or somebody tells you, go read some Quran, perhaps when you're just having a low, that could help you. But because you're just feeling mentally low right now, you're not feeling as high as you usually do. That could work. That can help a little bit. If you listen to something relaxing that can help stimulate your spirit, that can help you relax, then that can help in this case. However, if somebody is mentally ill, suffering from a mental illness or a disorder, that kind of language is not going to help right away. You can compare it to somebody who has a broken arm or a leg, right? What happens in this case is when they have a broken arm or a leg, a prayer is not going to help them with pain in that moment, right? What do you think they're going to need in that moment?
Doctor. Medication.
Right? So medication, morphine to stop the pain, get an x-ray, get a splinter on the broken bone, start the healing process, right? And probably looking at different ways of functioning. If they can't pray properly with a broken arm or leg, that's going to deter things as well. But I'm just saying, even just their everyday functions with everything that they do with a broken arm or leg is going to be inhibited until they get used to and they adapt, and they're taking care of the pain while it's healing. Now, at this point, could you introduce spirituality with them? Could you introduce talk of patience? Could you introduce to them resiliency? Could you introduce to them, okay, let's look at different ways of coping with your emotional struggles that you're dealing with because you're not as physically able as you were before? Perhaps this is when it could work. This is where spirituality can come in. So same thing with somebody who is dealing with a mental breakdown, perhaps, right? Who is not feeling well, dealing with depression or anxiety, bipolar, and so on and so forth. They're going to need the proper assessment. They're going to need the proper treatment for the disorder, for the illness, so that when they work on that, they get back on track with that, right? Then we can talk about the spirituality, healing, and treatment. And this treatment could be, of course, whether it's with the therapist where they work on different aspects of their lives. Could be that they're stuck in their lives, perhaps in school, or family, in relationship. So they take a look at these different aspects, factors in their lives that contribute to that anxiety or that depression that took place because of these triggers perhaps around them. Don't forget also mention that it could be genetic and they need medication with the chemical imbalance, right? So when we look holistically, and I do believe it's about eating well, sleeping well, exercise, getting rid of toxicity, sometimes the environment that they're in, the people that they're involved with, friends or family, or even colleagues, right? Could be just toxic energy on social media, different people like that. And of course, treatment with medication, proper balance of everything else. So when all of these things are in balance, then you're more likely to have this work, right? If they're off balance, it's not going to work. So we consistently want to put things in balance, including the spirituality. And I do believe that it can help with the ups and downs, of course, right? And it can also help in the treatment. I absolutely believe that. I'm not going to jump ahead to another question that has to do with that, but I do absolutely believe that it can. Now, when does it not help? Well, perhaps there's something off within the treatment plan that's not working. We need to reassess that. Could it be the medication? Could it be that that person is still in that toxic environment? Could it be that they're not exercising to get rid of stress hormones? Sometimes you can't because for whatever reason, you don't have access to a gym or you're physically unable to. So we have to find different ways of getting rid of the stress hormones that are in the body, looking at proper eating, right? So something's got to give in this, and the action plan of all of these things that impact our wellness, right? From our work, from our school, from our career path, from our families, friends, all of these things, finances, the environment that we're in. Are we living in a war-torn country, or are we living in first world and challenging ourselves, or being challenged by first world challenges? So it truly is very individual, but I do believe that there is a proper treatment in terms of a proper action plan with the appropriate professional to work with to help you get back on track.
Okay. Sorry, there's just a bit of a lag where your voice is coming in and
No
then
worries.
your picture's loading in, so I just wanted to make sure you were finished. Yeah, I actually agree with everything you said, and the point you made about making the comparison with mental health, and for example, having a broken bone is something that is really important, especially in some South Asian countries such as India and Pakistan. And for the elder generation, hard to grasp on these ideas. So, like for example, if your kid has a broken arm, like you're not gonna tell them that, oh, go pray and read some Quran and that'll help you heal. And I feel like if we approached everything with that mindset, that everything has its set necessities to be responded to with, we'd be in much better shape spiritually and mentally as Muslims. But it's just something that needs to be worked on collectively as our society progresses. So
Absolutely.
that should.
Good points. Good points. And using the language, like we said, in which our parents can connect with, or different cultures and different generations, we're using a language of faith and culture in describing the illnesses and the challenges or the moods or the energies, then our parents and our cultures are going to be more likely to accept it and work on possible treatment. Yeah.
Absolutely. And with that, I'm going to transition into how it could be helpful to use spirituality on a day-to-day basis to deal with mental issues. Our next question is, how can we use spirituality to deal with daily stresses such as school, family, and etc.?
So there's a concept of mindfulness that we use in psychology. We talk about wellness and we talk about mental health and psychology, which is a very powerful tool that I find can be found in different cultures and different faith systems, but it's just called differently and it's practiced differently. And I find now there's been more research and discussion around mindfulness when it comes to meditation, for example, or consciousness or awareness, that as Muslims we have had for 1400 years, and that we don't really look at it that way. So for example, when we take a look at our prayers, and this is why I spent so much time discussing that presentation that I popped up earlier, because we take a look at the daily treatments that Allah has prescribed for us, so to speak, but from a psychotherapeutic lens, which helps us really understand it differently and give it a new appreciation in terms of the fact that we've had this for all of our lives and we've had it for 1400 years, but we don't look at it that way. A lot of us perhaps are like, we have to pray, right? We have to pray 5 times a day. It's our salah, it's our ritual. Sometimes we pray mindlessly, right? Get up, go down. Our mind is somewhere else. Have you heard of the joke? If you lost your key, go pray, you'll remember where it is.
Yeah.
So it's the same idea here. It's like you're mindlessly doing it. So what we want to do is to be mindful in our salah. The idea here is that there's so many different ideas and interpretations, and I'm not one to talk about it from an Islamic scholarly point of view, but I'm looking at it from a psychotherapeutic point of view, what I've learned and just over the years how it's evolved. The prayer can be seen as that timeout from our worldly interactions to be mindful in terms of God and the akhirah, so to speak, right? To the immaterial things of life. That's one way of looking at it. And so when you are connecting with God at the time that He has prescribed for us, right? To remind ourselves to be in constant connection with Him and to leave that material world, that's a very powerful meditation right there, so to speak, right? That you are putting your focus, you're timing yourself out from the world, of your exams, your work, your family, your responsibilities, your worldly responsibilities, and you're mindfully connecting yourself to God for, let's say, Salatul Dhuhr or Al-Asr, midday, right? You're timing yourself out, you're unplugging, so to speak, right? With the digital lingo that we use these days, you're unplugging yourself from all of this and plugging yourself to God. That's such a beautiful way of connecting, right? So if you can look at salah so much more than what you have to do, but rather as an opportunity to be mindful and conscious, to connecting yourself to God, to the immaterial things of this world, this is a very powerful way of doing it. Now, mindfulness entails that you observe your feelings, your emotions, and your thoughts as they go through you without resisting, without judgment. That's the idea. So if you have a thought, and this is from a psychotherapeutic point of view, where we take a look at observing your anger, for example, right? So just a little sidestep from Salah here. Observing your anger. observing your anxious thoughts or observing somebody else's, right? And your response to that, rather than judging yourself and saying, oh, I shouldn't be feeling this way. Oh, that's so wrong of me. That's so haram of me. And I should have more mercy. You see the judgment when you do that. What would you feel here if you were to do that with yourself? It's pretty intense, right? It's a heavy feeling on here. What you want to do is say, okay, so I notice that I am feeling angry and I feel the emotion here. I feel my shoulders are tight and I feel that my heart is racing and the muscles are tensing here. You see how you're observing without judging. And so this exercise is something that you can also apply when we do meditation practices such as dhikr, such as tasbih, right? You are meditating and focusing yourself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by constantly moving your fingers with the beads and in constant dhikr, right? And what does Allah say in Surah Al-Ra'd, the thunder that I mentioned earlier, is that ala bi dhikrillah tatma'inna al-qulub. Verily, with the remembrance of God, the hearts find that serenity and that peace. So this can be applied, for example, in taking a moment. Again, you notice when you do tasbih, you're like, Allah, 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 Allah. Yeah, what's for dinner? Allahu Akbar. We're doing that kind of dhikr. You're not going to really benefit much out of that. I find that I do that with my daughter. During the pandemic, we've honestly had good opportunity to pray together during the day, which you can't really do when I'm at work and she's physically at school. But at home, we've been able to do that. And so right as soon as we finish the salah, I try to teach her, get into the habit of taking the masbaha and just going through it properly and focusing. And then she starts talking about the other things. I'm like, tasbih, tasbih. And then after it, I'll explain to her why. And it has to do with that ultimate focus, right? In terms of meditating, doing it very slowly. Now, to add to it, when we look at daily practices, is doing breathing techniques, right? So slow, deep breathing through your nose, counting up to 4. I can't even manage that right now without coughing, but breathing through the nose, counting up to 4. You try that with me, brother. So, and everybody else. So go holding your breath at 7. And then releasing out at 8, very slowly through your mouth. I'm not going to do that again right now, but the more, you practice this, okay, it works. Just right now, I've just got allergies going. But the more you breathe this very slowly, okay, you do this deep breathing along with, let's say, your tasbih, along with how you pray. This slows down the heart rate, okay? This slows down your heart rate. This gets oxygen where it needs to go in your body. This relaxes the muscles and the tension where it may be. And it's a very powerful tool that I use a lot with my own students or my own clients or people who reach out to me and say, I need a little bit of help with this. How do I reduce my stress, so on and so forth. So this is definitely something you can time out during the day. During your salah, you can, even before you start your salah, do some deep breathing, do some dhikr. And dhikr doesn't necessarily just have to be tasbih. There's so many different ways of doing dhikr. Just go to alislam.org or du'as.org or ask your favorite scholar. And even just taking the names of God, there's specific names of Asma Allah, the 99 names that have power in them and such spirituality that you can lose yourself in that remembrance. Al-Wadud, right? And all these beautiful names of God that have spiritual depth. And there's so much research out there, again, from the scholarly, maybe non-English, but perhaps there's more translations now on the different types of dhikr that you can do that can really transcend you when you really get into it. So breathing, muscle tension, relaxation, and try, like I said, to look at your salah as a timeout to unplug yourself from the material world. You've got that at Fajr to remind you to get up and constantly remind yourself that the night ends and the day begins. And then midday to take yourself away from the material aspects of the world, whether it's school or work. Again, Maghrib and Isha leading into the night, that also reminds you of the different parts of the day that God has divided up for us in terms of rest. And I learned this recently. I forgot, I want to give credit to the person I learned it from. I think it was Sheikh Jafar, if I remember correctly, where he talked about he likes it when the time difference changes. The reason being is because as we have more nighttime now, darkness, less sunlight, it gives you more time for ibadah. And I found that was such a beautiful way of looking at that. You have more, the calmness of the night, you have more opportunity, more time, more connection, more time from the time the sun sets till Fajr for ibadah. And I thought that was so beautiful. So it's all how you choose to look at it. So these are different ways, small ways that you can do that are also psychologically based, that you can apply from a spiritual point of view to your daily stressors, right? Don't forget to exercise, whether it's horseback riding, whether it's archery, whether it's swimming. These are the sunnah sports that I like to call them. The idea with that, all of these stress hormones are gone out of our body if we can engage in some kind of healthy physical activity. So obviously, we don't have access to all of these right now, but you can definitely work out at home. Those of you who can go to the gym, I made sure that I had a gym appointment tonight because we have to book ahead of time because I knew today was going to be a long, busy, and stressful day, alhamdulillah. So knowing that I have that to look forward to, because now it's booked, you can't just walk in whenever you want because of the pandemic. I'm more likely like having something to look forward to in terms of how we can use spirituality. Something to look forward to can also help ease your stressors. There's so much more to answer to this. These are just a few little tips.
Yeah, it looks like this is something that could take many different routes. And something I was thinking about while you were answering was that it sounds like a lot of this question has to do with how you view your daily priorities. So I feel like on behalf of most students, I could say that every day, especially during a time like this when we have finals going on and exam week taking place, our main priorities happen to be our studying and whatever review sheets we have and the essay we have due. And this is actually a time where stress and anxiety does peak its levels in your body. Everyone, of course, processes it differently, but the way you deal with it is through your prioritization of, for example, prayers or zikr, like you mentioned. So, are you sleeping late at night? Are you being able to wake up early in the morning for Fajr? When are you getting your prayer in? What are your timings like? And it just seems like a lot that had to do with this question comes down to how you prioritize your daily routine and what you feel is important.
And
Because at the end
what
of
you're
the
used to, what you're used to is your routine as well, right? If this was something you weren't engaged in before in terms of, let's say, like we described the salah, or if you don't have healthy balanced eating or healthy exercise routines, it's going to be hard trying to start that. As a student, I just put that out there for students who are like, well, I don't have time to read a whole juz of Quran right now, or to do dua kumel, or this, and that. We're not saying to do these big rituals at the moment, because as a student, your struggle, your jihad in this is being a student. I remember this was taught to me when I was in university, and it kind of helped with, oh, I can't do as much during Muharram. Oh, I can't do as much during Shahr Ramadan or all these a'mal because I've got exams right now. And I don't remember who, I always like to give credit to when I learn things from people, but I remember learning this from perhaps other students or a scholar or somebody at the time that taught us, perhaps even my mom, God bless her, that your jihad as a student is your studies. And that really helped. That really also changed the perspective that you can put so much more effort into your studies, knowing that you're actually getting thawab for this knowledge. And in fact, you are, right? Seek knowledge from
exactly, yeah.
the grave as far as China. So in a way, that seeking of your knowledge, whether it's through academics or through Islamic or whatever knowledge that you are seeking for your degree, for your diploma, that path of knowledge is a form of getting thawab as well, seeking that knowledge.
Exactly. And with that, I would like to transition to our next question, which links sort of in a way to the last question on a day-to-day basis, but the question asks, is it possible to achieve mental health and stability without spirituality, as Western ideals often promote? So living in America, Canada, Europe.
So you're asking the Muslim counselor. So what am I going to say? I'm going to say that you will definitely need spirituality, right? Now the argument comes back to, but not all the students you see are Muslim or faith-based. So absolutely, in this case, it's a tricky question, right? Because not all the people I see are going to be of a Muslim or faith-based background, and so the language is not going to work with them. So in this case, okay, when we talk about helping yourself get back on track, when, you know, like you said, Western ideals, it's about how we use the language. So when we look at mindfulness and meditation, that can be separate from spirituality in the sense that people don't necessarily put God in the equation here, right? The Islamic perspective, like we said, is submission to God. This is how we get our itmi'nan, right? Is by having God as our ultimate goal of getting closer, our path, our journey to God, in our well-being, in our mental health, and our spirituality is always directed towards God in the end. So when we look at Western ideas where they tend to be secular, we can't use that language. Like we looked at earlier, we looked at psychoanalysis, cognitive behavioral therapy, and so on and so forth. They have different outcomes and usage to get to that goal. They don't, it's devoid of God and religion and faith, right? So they can work, you could say, depending on the person's beliefs. Does that make sense? Because that is part of their equation. It would work for them. Would
Yeah.
models work per se for people of faith or Muslims, especially if that is a huge part of their discourse, their schema, their worldview? Probably not, which is why you have a lot of Muslims now, alhamdulillah, seeking therapy, but they're looking to have people who have either a Muslim background and understanding when it comes to treatment, or even somebody who may not be Muslim, but has an understanding of faith. So I actually see a therapist, and I've seen one for years now because I believe in it. And I do believe it's important that you have that space where you can objectively talk to somebody and be a person, not a therapist all the time. And I specifically requested for a male because I needed somebody who understood the male perspective as well as the female, and somebody who understood religion, but not necessarily a Muslim. That was really hard to find. Alhamdulillah, I got a great therapist who himself studied world religions and uses faith in the therapy and has an understanding of Islamic concepts. So when we speak, and I throw in Islamic terms here and there when it comes to psychology or just basic cultural understanding, he gets it and he knows how to have a conversation with me, and he challenges me as well. So I find that nowadays we are seeing that on the rise, where a lot of people, alhamdulillah, as Muslims, they are understanding the need for having that good mental balance in their life, but what to do to get it is to seek the appropriate resources and supports. And part of the research that I did back then was to see that people are less likely to go seek therapy because they feel they will be misunderstood, because there is no faith aspect, there is no spirituality. Or, you know, I have students sometimes who come in and say, okay, thank God, I don't need to explain myself why I have to be home at 4:30 when it's dark. You know, maybe a Western psychologist or psychotherapist is going to be like, why do you have to be home at 4:30? Well, it's nighttime. It's 4:30. To my dad, it's nighttime because it's dark outside. So sometimes the cultural nuances are missed, but when you have somebody who understands that, then you speak the same language. So again, I don't believe it's possible for somebody to achieve proper mental health balance and stability without spirituality if they are somebody of a faith background. I don't think the secular models will work on them. That will potentially work on those who don't have this as part of their discourse. You have to be able to speak the same language. I don't mean the context or I forget the term right now, but the actual language, right? But the understanding of the culture, understanding of the faith. When you have that, even with somebody who's not Muslim, then definitely you can work on your mental health goals with that therapist spiritually as well, even if they're not of spiritual background.
Okay. Something you brought up in that question was how when you mentioned your therapist or anybody else was to find somebody who understands you, and for you, someone that worked was a male who understood religion, and someone who was well rehearsed in the kind of things that you could talk about and be open with. And I feel like that ties into our next question, which is going to be, how does mental health in Muslims compare and contrast between the two genders? And this is actually a question I sent in myself because I often find myself being raised by three women and my dad, but my dad being the one who's working all the time, questioning how I should be mentally, because oftentimes I find myself under a lot of pressure, but I use like examples around me. So like my dad, how he worked through everything to give us, me and my siblings, the best life he could, and my mom, how she dealt with challenges after challenges, uh, and how like I should be now in this part of my life. I'm now 20 years old, wrapping up college soon,
Well, you're only
and
20.
yeah.
Now you look much
eh,
older than that. I think
yeah.
exams have taken a toll on you, huh?
No, it's just yeah, my birthday was actually last week, so I just turned 20 years old.
Birthday
Uh
blessings, mashallah. May you live a long and healthy life, inshallah.
Thank you so much. I mean, so my question really just comes down to is how does it differentiate between men and women in Islam, and how their mental health is impacted because of either social norms, cultural norms, or religious norms?
So I'm looking here at the side where my books are. There's a book that I wanted to grab, but I don't see it. What is it on? And it's actually on the differences between, here it is. The differences between, did I move my screen? Yes, I did. Okay, so I'll start first with the secular, but it does have faith aspects in there, and then we can connect it to the Islamic perspective. I have another book that's specific, but I can't see it here. But it's this book here. It's called Why, actually it is this one. So there's the classic one, which is Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. That was the classic book. And this one here talks specifically about why Mars and Venus collide. So it talks about the physiological differences, including how we respond to stress. For those of you who want to understand gender differences when it comes to stress and mental health, this is an excellent book. Do you guys see that? Dr. John Gray, he's the guru. He is the person at least I do. For years now, I went and bought the entire series after I read his first book. I'm sure you've heard of it, Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus, the classic book. So what you see here is it takes a look, again, how we respond to stress differently. Men tend to respond to stress with what? What do you think?
I feel like what society is going to say is like masculinity, and how men respond to stress by kind of shutting it out and acting like it doesn't impact them mentally.
Yeah. There's a lot to be said around that when it comes to gender differences. And, let's take out the word Muslims in general and just say people in general, and then we can apply it to our community, right? This is kind of like the standard when it comes to emotions and dealing with challenges. Like you said, our young men are brought up, our boys too, being young men, to not show emotion, right? Not show vulnerability. I actually did a whole lecture on that in terms of the psychology of vulnerability. If you go back and look at the Muharram series I did, I actually took a lot of psychological concepts and connected it to each of the nights. And of course, it's all related to spirituality. So for those of you who want to take a look at that more, go check that out. But that specific one on vulnerability, we looked a lot at gender differences, especially with men, and especially from a Muslim perspective, and perhaps even more a Shia perspective, which was interesting because when we take a look at vulnerability, this was exhibited and modeled by the men of the Ahlul Bayt and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in terms of showing emotion. Did the Prophet not show emotion when his wife died? Did the Prophet not show emotion when his uncle died, or dear members of his family, or when his son died? Right? He showed intense grief. And when you read about those stories, that shows you a lot right there that the Prophet wouldn't do something unless he wants people to know about it, right? So showing grief and emotion was a healthy way of dealing with the loss he existed, right? This is a really important thing to know. We take this a bit further. We look at how the Imams also exhibited emotion. And who other than, of course, Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam, how he showed his grief after what happened in Karbala. Now, these are, of course, extraordinary circumstances. They, there's so much there. I can't even begin to get into it. It took me only 11 lectures to just start getting into it during Muharram. But there's so much there that took place that obviously will bring tears out of a stone, as historians have said. But when we look at it from the perspective of the Imam, how he spent his entire life after the events of Karbala in grief, and how he showed emotion when we know the story, of course, when water was brought to him, right? How he would remember Abu Abdullah and how he would remember what happened in Karbala and so on and so forth. So there was no restraint on showing his vulnerability there, showing his tears and his emotions. And of course, Imam Ali, when Fatima al-Zahra was brutally murdered, right? He showed and exhibited his grief, and people saw that. So you see, that's modeled. That's modeled right there. Now we can say, well, we're not the Imams, right? Oh, we are not them, and so on and so forth. But we are always trying to follow what they teach us, right? The good behavior and so on and so forth, manners, so on and so forth. But also when you look at vulnerability and how they show emotion, that's okay to show as well if we are exhibiting grief or experiencing grief rather, or if there's a loss in our life in some way or another. It's okay for men to show emotions, right? And we are encouraged to show these emotions during Muharram, the majalis, or any of the shahadas that we have, do we not? Like cry, let it out kind of thing. You're crying, and there's double barakah. I always say that there's science behind the tear that comes down and the toxins that are released in the tear. Sheikh Azhar Nasser actually did a wonderful job this past Arba'iniya, where he had a series of lectures on well-being, and there's one in particular that I really enjoyed listening to because it was very connected to the things that I speak about when it comes to the tears. He goes in explicit detail and a lot of science. So I highly recommend, if you want to learn more about that, listen to that lecture. So it's just this past Arba'iniya where he talks about the tear, the science behind it, but also spiritually, how there's the benefit. And we know this. We hear about crying majalis, there's a barakah for it. And I always say, well, there's a double barakah, there's a double benefit, meaning that when you first release that tear, like we said, the toxins are released, which is why you feel so much better. But then there's also the blessings that you get when you're releasing that tear for the Ahlul Bayt alayhum salam. And we need to teach our young men that it is okay to show emotion. That doesn't take away from your masculinity. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Just like we see for the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam in their examples. Did not Abu Fadl al-Abbas be motivated, of course, on so many other things, but was he not motivated by the vulnerability that he saw of the women and the children that needed that water? Did that not stir up his shuja'ah, his courage to go and get the water for the children, right? So there's so many different motivators when it comes to our vulnerability and how to act upon that as well. There's so many examples, like I said, that you can connect with that way. Now, furthermore, I highly recommend you check out the pictures of, if I remember the name correctly, of brother Hussam Dia. He is an Iraqi British photographer in the UK, and he does freelance photography for the Muslim Vibe. I just happened to be that day in the office a few years back when he popped in and was talking about a project that he was working on. You can check it out on his Instagram, where he was taking pictures of men as they expressed vulnerability. So powerful. And in the same lecture that I have on the psychology of vulnerability, you'll see those pictures. I talk about this, you can call it a qualitative photographic research that he did, where he showed these incredibly powerful images of men of different cultural backgrounds, ages, showing emotion. They were actually discussing something of intense emotion the moment he captured those emotions. So powerful. So this is something that we need to normalize. And I spent a lot of time talking deliberately about this, because as males in our community, there seems to be a shift in gender role responsibilities that perhaps have made the men feel a little bit more emasculated when women have had to work or, be more stronger and put themselves more out there. That's created a confusion. And I would say because of the negative influence of feminism, right? That has really, I think a lot of Muslim women have misinterpreted feminism in the wrong way and tried to apply it Islamically, when in fact it's the opposite. When you say you're a Muslim, That's it. You don't need to say I'm a feminist Muslim. That's completely is the opposite of what being a Muslim is all about, right? Because you already have your rights as a female in Islam. Of course, the way it's practiced, that's different. That's a whole other discussion and how it affects society and our mental health. However, you see there's a history and there's almost like a domino effect from what feminism has done to today, where I think it has negatively influenced our Muslim women and misunderstanding their own rights, what they already have in our faith, that you don't need to turn to feminism to get your rights. It's already there in our faith. But that shift has caused a rift in our community and a misunderstanding amongst the young men, I would say, right? Even the older men, where perhaps there's been a change within their home, different attitudes, and of the women, right? So of course that's going to impact people's well-being and their mental health. So let's get back specifically to this here idea, after understanding this a little bit now, is when men now show their vulnerability, we cannot use language such as toughen up, men don't cry, boys don't cry. These are things that we know we've heard. Wouldn't you say, Brother Haidar?
Yeah.
Like we've
Unfortunately.
heard this in our communities where it's not encouraged to men to show them. But that type of attitude with what we've just presented so far is completely against what our faith teaches us and our role models. It's okay to show your emotion. Need I remind you of the father of Prophet Joseph, Yusuf alayhi salam, Prophet Yaqub? He showed his emotions till he became blind, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So there has to be a healthy balance of exhibiting emotion, not to the point where you get blind, of course, but a healthy balance, but also safe circle for men to be able to express their emotions. Because how are men expressing their emotions now? Through anger, through frustration. And perhaps this is what depression in men is seen as. And we've seen that in psychological studies, that anger and frustration and violence is exhibited for depression for men. Women, it comes out perhaps in the typical symptoms of depression that we see. So there is a difference in that. But it also has to do with the way that we need to contribute to the upbringing of our young men and also our women as well. And to the young mothers out there, you are raising the next generation of Abbasis, right? What are you going to teach them? How are you going to teach them? You're going to teach them strength and vulnerability, courage, but a soft heart at the same time, knowing how to show emotion and vulnerability and love and compassion. So has to be a healthy balance with that. It's tricky, but using language such as toughen up, get over it, don't cry. I don't think that's not very healthy to the discussion that we're having here at all, right? So there has to be that awareness and openness. And I can tell you, mashallah, there's been so much more now, especially with men's mental health awareness, which is why they call November Movember with the mustache, right? There's a lot of awareness on men's mental health to help as well, because they're more likely, the males who are more likely to suffer from depression are more likely prone to have violent suicidal endings. Does that make sense? More than women. So that says a lot, that men who are dealing with suicidality are more violently likely to take their lives. And that's why the statistics show that, is because the way that they commit suicide is more violent and more aggressive, that they would lose their lives compared to women who perhaps use more softer means such as medication and can be saved, that kind of thing. I know, and we should have started right at the beginning of our presentation to say that we are going to be talking about sensitive topics that could potentially trigger. So any of you who are listening are impacted by this, please do not hesitate to reach out to the Nasiha hotline, or those of you who are in the UK, to the Muslim Youth Helpline, to talk to a counselor if you are impacted, to help you, or to reach out to your therapist as well, okay? Because I know these can be very sensitive topics when we get into the detail like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask if you could touch on how all of that contrasts with how mental health differs for females. I know you touched on the feministic reality that many Muslim women deal with now, and some choose to use that, some choose not to. But how do you think that same level of like mental health is perceived by a Muslim female who doesn't have that focus of like femininity where they're turning to that for their answers, but rather how they deal with it on a day-to-day basis.
So when we look at and I always like using the example of, let's say, depression, because we connect with the ideas of sadness, lethargy, so low energy, not engaged as you once were with your school, your extracurricular activities, your family. These are the symptoms that we tend to see specifically with depression, and these are the things that you would see perhaps in females. Like I was saying, you see in terms of the statistics, we see that women tend to have more mental health problems, let's say, than men. Why is that? I'm going to put that back onto you to help answer the question. Why do you suppose that the statistics show that women have more mental health issues than men?
I feel like the pretty cut and dry answer to that is that women are not expected to not show their vulnerability, while men are expected to conceal whatever feelings they may have and whatever depressive thoughts or overall poor mental health state that they might be going through is not often reported by men because of their attitude that's kind of like empowered by society, where, oh, you're a guy, you shouldn't be like this, or
Right.
you just have to suck it up. But females are viewed in society as much more sensitive and fragile, and then they are much more open to sharing their thoughts
Right
with
there.
a medical
You got
expert.
it right there. You gave an excellent background, and that's the main point right there, Brother Haider, that women are more likely to share and talk. And this is what this author talks about here in his book, The Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. He talks about the differences in how we communicate. That's the key one right there, right? Like you mentioned, men will perhaps keep in more, where women are more likely to share their problems, right? They'll reach out to their sister, their best bud, their babes, their moms, their aunts, a female that they can connect with, or a friend that they can connect with, right? Whereas males, the way they process problems or issues is perhaps by secluding. And that's why the author here talks about men are like elastic bands, where they pull away, go to their cave, right? And in the cave, they do their processing. In that processing, that's where they think about the problem, or they hang out with the guys, or go play, some football or soccer or whatever it is. That's where they process their problems and issues and figure it out. This is how the author describes it, Dr. Gray. Whereas women, like you mentioned, they're more likely to share. In that sharing back and forth, that helps them. Also, key thing here, so this is a tip for the young men and women who are looking to get married or are married a long time or soon, or just recently. You need to understand how to communicate with your partner. Understand their way of communicating, right? Gender differences as well, but also personality and styles, right? Sometimes your partner wants to talk about something, and males, what they tend to do, as the author says, is jump in with a solution because they are the Mr. Fix-It. Whereas the women are the home improvement committee, as the author describes them, because they want to talk about things and improve and so on and so forth. So this is really important, that when your partner comes to you and she has a problem, she wants to talk about it, gentlemen, please listen. Don't offer solutions right away unless she asks you for it. She's probably just looking for a listening ear, a shoulder to cry on, a hug, giving that emotion. And by the way, when you hold somebody for 20 seconds minimum, you release the oxytocin hormone in your body, which is the love hormone, which also, when you hold your child, when you hold a pet, when you hold a loved one, makes you feel so good. So, trick, after your partner's crying and she's upset, give that hug, as it will be very powerful. And although you may not have done anything, you have done a lot by being a listener. Okay, so the tip. So this is very important when it comes to gender differences, when it comes to dealing with communication, talking about problems like you mentioned. Women are more likely to do that, subhanAllah. We have to also be careful not to generalize. I said that one time when I was doing these presentations in a city, and this lady came up and said, you know what, I'm the complete opposite. You just described my husband and I am him. And so in this case, the gender difference was complete opposite, but understanding the style is really important key thing here.
Absolutely. Very well said. The point you bring up about parents and knowing how to know their reactions is what's going to be taking us into our penultimate question, which is how does parental pressure impact Muslim kids mentally in first world countries versus second and third world countries? And this is actually another question I posed myself for this event because I feel like it would be really insightful for a majority of our audience who will consist of many adults, grad students, and then undergrads, because this is something I'm sure a lot of us have dealt with, where our parents have impacted our mental health, whether it's negatively or positively. And for many students who have immigrant parents, it impacts them negatively because of the certain pressure that is there from their parents. So if you could touch on that.
This is one of my favorite examples of what I personally went through when I was supposed to be a doctor and ended up being a psychotherapist. Because in our cultures, you're either a doctor or
An
what?
engineer.
An engineer. There's nothing that exists practically in between. So, and the mentality here when it comes to, let's say, first world countries or immigrant parents and cultural parents is because of the standards that they grew up in their countries, the societal expectations, right? That these are the desired positions to be because of status, because of financial security, and so on and so forth. And it brings pride to the families if you are highly educated in these positions, right? So I see this firsthand with students who come from different cultural backgrounds, especially international students, where they're studying engineering or pre-med, but their mind, their brains are not meant for that. They're meant for the language arts. They're meant for film. They're meant for fill in the blanks, whatever it is, but not what they're in. But some come from families where they're expected to take over the family business. So they have to study business instead of psychology. Some come from engineering families where the status is they must continue being engineers, even though they can't stand numbers, right? So we see these challenges. And I work with them in terms of trying to either accept the circumstances, meaning they can't get out of it because that's what the expectations are for them to fulfill. So we have to look at acceptance. Okay, working on acceptance. Acceptance can be very challenging. And I have the book right here. Just going to grab it. Hopefully my screen doesn't fall over. There we go. This is a wonderful book that I use all the time in terms of
I think your audio just cut out. I don't know if you can hear me.
looking at change and the happiness we
There we
find
go.
by embracing them. Okay. No, we're good. We're good. We just got cut off because of internet. We're good now.
Oh, okay. Perfect.
We're good. Yeah, we're good. It's just a bit internet. Yeah. So this author, Dr. David Rico, he is a psychotherapist, got over 30 years experience, and he's got another book here, as you can see here. This is an amazing book. It was actually brought to my attention by a student a few years ago. So look, it's okay. It might happen a few more times, but we're okay.
Okay.
So this resource could be great to help people who are dealing with this type of parental pressure. All right. Our internet's not being very friendly.
Yeah, I was just waiting for it to come back.
Yalla khair inshallah. So I'm just going to go through them quickly. here. So and you can, yeah, it's prime time right now. So I think the internet usage is going to be high up. So maybe we can wrap up after this. So I'll quickly go through it. 5 givens of life that you can apply here or to other areas of your life where you find that there are some pressures that you can't really change, is look and understand that everything changes and ends, that things do not always go according to plan, that life is not always fair, pain is a part of life, and to accept and work around these 5. So when you work around these 5 givens, then you are more likely to come to that itminan that we mentioned earlier, that peace. So how do we apply this to the situation? Well, there comes the point where we need to have that open discussion with our parents and talk about our abilities rather than expectations. Is that, you know what, I'm not going to succeed as an engineer in this program because my brain cannot understand numbers. I specifically told my family, I can't deal with inorganic chemistry, biochemistry, or physics. Even though my dad, mashallah, has a PhD in physics, and a lot of my aunts and uncles are in this field. For me, that's just not going to work. I know my skills and abilities have to do with public speaking, have to do with psychology, have to do with writing, language arts, so on and so forth. So how am I going to do that in a field that I'm going to have a job or a career or a profession where I'm going to utilize my abilities? And so this is the open discussion that we need to have with our families in terms of looking at expectations as well as our abilities. And that's why I always tell parents, please nurture your children's skills and their abilities so that when you do that, they can find a path that works best for what they want to do. Because you were there how many hours a day doing your work? It's got to be something worthwhile doing. It's got to have meaning. It's got to have something that motivates you. I know sometimes, things happen in life where we don't get these opportunities or we have to change our path with sudden things that happen. And so this is when we talk about acceptance, this type of acceptance helps us work with that. So we see this a lot in our first world countries, and even in the other parts of the world where there's that push for education for the wrong reason, for status rather than the appropriate talent and natural skills and abilities that our children have. Some of the workshops that I do an interactive workshop with parents and their children meaning teenagers or young adults, not little kids necessarily. And we do that. We work on this communication facilitation. You could say, when we look at different aspects of our well-being, so friends, school, career, religion, social media, physical and mental health, and this comes up a lot, this specific one. How do you deal with that? How do you cope with families dealing with this issue, right? So when we take a look at that, it's really important to understand how to be able to communicate with our families. Sometimes really hard to talk to your parents, perhaps but I can't field. I want to be able to work in a field that I could really maximize my abilities. And when we mentioned earlier talking about mental health, right? When it comes to the expectations of our parents, this is not good for my mental health. Perhaps that language won't work exactly, but we have to use it in a way that connects with them. So when I hear these words, it makes me feel ABC. So using I statements to express what's going on rather than when you say this, when you do that. But there is a cultural clash as well. There's a generational clash. And it has to do whether it's careers, whether it has to do with hijab, has to do with religion, has to do with cultural norms and expectations. That's just going to be there. But we have to find a way to communicate with each other in a way of expressing ourselves in a healthy way. And sometimes we do need the support and help of different people around us so that we can communicate, and using the language of spirituality in terms of nurturing that soul, nurturing that self, and being able to talk to our parents in a way where, we're bringing that spiritual talk in terms of our growth and our development. That can bring the family together as well. You say things along the line of, for young men and women to kind of, it comes with trust as well, right? Sometimes I hear a lot from young people say, well, my parents don't trust me. That's why I have to be home at 4:30. And what the parents say, it's like, it's not that I don't trust you. I raised you. I trust the way I raised you, but it's the society around you. So then the child will come back and say, if you raised me and you trust the way that you raised me, you have to trust the way how I'm going to interact with these influences around me. So this question is a whole other workshop on its own. It's a whole other discussion. The takeaways here is communication, getting the right people involved to mediate sometimes, to facilitate, and to talk with pure intention. Tell them, you're not here rebelling. Unless you are, that's a different story. We have to talk about that. But be able to communicate. Now, just quickly, the same book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, on chapter 11, okay, is how to communicate difficult feelings. And it's not just for couples. This is for anybody. It's a tool called the love letter technique, where it takes a look at the different emotions that we're feeling. So frustration, anger, sadness, and it shows you how to express your emotions and work through them. Writing, of course. And in the end, we have a guest here. My cat has decided to join us. He's somewhere there. He always likes to contribute by showing pet therapy, right? So, Noah, where are you? I just heard him meowing. He'll come join us in a sec. So, takeaways, like I said, learn how to communicate with your family, with your parents, to express, because chances are they're thinking either you're rebelling or you're being influenced by your peers and the negative society around you. But if you can show them, trust in what you raised me, trust in how you taught me and how you raised me, and inshallah, you can have open communication. Inshallah, in the future, we can also discuss this a little bit further, because this is like a whole program on its own. So I can't.
Okay. Yeah, I said yeah, absolutely. So, did you want to wrap it at that, or
we can do one question if you like?
Okay, so we have one more question left on that. Seems the connection's holding steady for now. Knock on wood.
Inshallah.
Inshallah, it holds up. So the next question is just asking about how you use your teachings, how you use the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt in your practice with clients, and is asking to be specific. So just be specific as much as you can while being confidential. So,
of course. Okay, so in this case, again, we need to understand, depending on who I have in front of me, is how I will approach the therapy. If it's somebody who is not faith-based, of course, I'm not going to use that type of language with them, right? I'll be using a language that they connect with and understand that will help them in their treatment. If we're talking to somebody who's a Muslim, let's say, who's not engaged or practicing, this language is not going to work with them either, right? What's funny, though, what's interesting, is that when I have students who are of Muslim background, first of all, when I go to the the waiting room, now it's all online, but before, when it was physical, I'd go to the waiting room and call their names out, and they take one look at me wearing hijab, the look of horror on their face. Oh my God, I'm going to tell her all the haram things that I've done. And so they come into the office and we start talking about things. And of course, I don't bring up religion at all. We focus on what they're there for. And I noticed by the end of the session, a lot of them start opening up. 99% of them, unless they're those who completely not included religion in their life, even though they're Muslim, they will start saying things like, I've stopped praying, I used to wear the hijab, or I'm doing this, or I'm doing that. And of course, in the session, there's no judgment. That's the key thing, is, my brothers and sisters, when somebody comes to you with a mental health challenge or anything heavy, we can't be the haram police and start judging them, right? We have to show love and compassion and understanding and that non-judgmental view, because then that will help them. Same thing here. What I would do with somebody who, let's say, is not really practicing, but at the end of the session, we'll start talking about, this and that. And so then I would say, well, how would you like to include that in your daily lives? Would you like to include that as part of your action plan in the therapy to bring in spirituality, right? So that's how it tends to come in. Then I have people who are straight up saying, hey, I want to feel closer to God. Hey, I want to be able to do this, or I want to do that. Now, I'll give an example, a specific example, of course, staying confidential. I had a student who came from one of the African, yes, he's meowing, but he's not showing up. If you insist human being here, Lois. Come on over. Well, we'll just wait till he comes. And so this student was from an African country that had a very harsh dictatorship. Okay. And this student was somebody who loved his country, but was seeing a lot of dhulm, a lot of oppression and tyranny happening in his country. How does that affect him mentally? A lot, of course. He's here as an international student studying, and this is happening back home. I think a lot of people in the last few years can relate to this type of thing where they're coming from war-torn countries and they can't do anything about it. So that feeling of helplessness can really trigger emotions that are related to, let's say, depression or anxiety. What then happens is that takes the focus and attention away from the school, right? You need that attention for your schoolwork. It's not there. So of course you're not going to do that well. I keep hearing him. Perhaps there's a mouse around here. I don't know. Do you hear the meows? This has become an almost.
I hear like squeaking, but I'm not too sure if that's the meows.
That's how he talks and squeaks. Loz, either you go up or go away. You are being very distracting. So what happened, I recall, this brother came in, and as soon as he saw the hijab, he said, Salamu alaikum to me. And it was during Shahr Ramadan Mubarak, and you see so much tiredness. And this was a brother, like I said, who felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. And so just being in the presence of a fellow Muslim doing therapy was very helpful to begin with. And of course, as we got on in our discussions, just so you're aware, I actually have permission from this brother to use his story, but I still don't want to disclose too much information, but he's allowed me to share his story. He was actually required to go back to his country, and he was afraid that he would be executed. And so he immediately, that afternoon, I recall when he came, he was asking for support of what he needed to do. And alhamdulillah, we were able to connect him to get refugee status and to be able to stay and not go back home. Now, we continued therapy for a long time after that. And what was incredible to see, although we were different Muslims, if you know what I mean, this brother loved to hear stories specifically about the Ahlul Bayt because he came from a religious family, but a religious family that did not have much about the Ahlul Bayt, subhanAllah. Because he was a pure soul, he connected to the stories. I remember one time he came during Muharram. I was all in black, as I always do, for 2 months during that time frame. And there was a discussion around the black. So I told him why I was wearing the black and whom I was showing grief and respect for. When I told him the story of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, Ya Allah, it made me shiver at the end what his response was. He said, Sister Barak, because that's how they pronounce my name, not Sister Barak. Sister Barak, one day when I become the president of my country, I will go on TV and I will say that I had therapy from a Muslim sister and a Muslim Shia sister, a follower and a lover of Imam Hussein, that taught me how to stand up against dhulm, against tyranny, indignity. Oh.
So powerful.
It was so powerful. Till this day, it gives me shivers when I remember what that brother said. So powerful. And we still to stay in touch even after he's done and graduated, got married and has children. He still keeps in touch, lets me know how he's doing. And alhamdulillah, wa shukr, to be able to be in a position to, first of all, help somebody, help them with their mental health. Second, in this case, it was a life or death situation. And third, this person, through our sessions, our healing sessions of talking about the daily challenges of school, studies, but also politics and religion and all of these external pressures, this young man, subhanAllah, was influenced by the story of Imam al-Hussein, how to stand up against tyranny because of where he came from and the tyranny that he witnessed in his country, and how he was influenced by these therapeutic sessions on so many different levels, including at this level. Imagine if this man does come to power one day. You'll know who it is if he does. He said he's going to say these things. But imagine that if he does get into a position of power and he has the opportunity to help people just the way that he was helped and saved, so to speak, by a Shia Muslim counselor. That's amazing, subhanallah. So Allah sometimes puts us in these positions where people come to you for support, for help, and absolutely the teachings of the Ahl al-Bayt, when it's warranted in the situation, can be hugely impactful in a therapeutic setting. Why not? Why not? I use a lot of the sayings of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam when it comes to, for example, the Prophet when he talks about, it came to my mind and it slipped, so it'll come back in a second. Prevention is better than the cure. This is attributed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so I use that in my sessions indirectly. I'll say things such as, the cat again. He's being a naughty cat today. Loz, where are you? In any case, such a statement, when you use it in your therapy, even if you don't say where it's from, is still powerful. That prevention is better than the cure. I see nothing but beauty. We can go on and on and on about that. Strength in the face of tyranny, resilience in the face of trauma, patience in the face of what she saw, Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam, right? So I personally garner strength from such sayings, but I also apply them indirectly, depending, of course, on who's in front of me. But these are universal messages that we all connect with, no matter what our background is.
Absolutely.
Alhamdulillah.
Okay, well, that was the last of our questions, and we are at the hour and 37-minute mark.
We could go on. I mean, we could totally go on with these topics, so we're not going to do that this time.
Yeah.
But the idea is that when we start talking about spirituality and connecting it to mental health and our wellness, and when we dig deep into it, like we started talking about the different aspects of the self, how it's connected to psychological concepts, right? How it's connected to our daily practices, whether it's the breathing, the salah, the meditation, the dhikr. These are all small things that we can do. There's so much more out there. We just touched upon, you could say, the tip of the iceberg, right? We just scratched the surface of it. And we invite you to explore more. And I just want to put out there for those of you who are interested, I actually did a recent study, you could call it. It was a qualitative study, not a quantitative research based like that, on the connection of well-being and going to having spiritual experiences such as the ziyarah. So if you look at the Muslim Counselor YouTube page of those who are interested, who want to learn more about spirituality and wellness, this is an excellent research that we put together in the form of how does the ziyarah impact your mental health. And it's also based on actual studies that we used in the documentary, where we looked at research that connect that idea. And this is recent research as well to connect these ideas that we've been talking about. So I highly recommend you check that out and explore. Go look at different scholars out there, look at different psychotherapists, psychologists that talk about spirituality and well-being, and you'll see the beautiful connection, especially from the Islamic perspective.
Absolutely. I feel like, just to recap, this has been an extremely insightful event for myself, especially. I want to not leave out the audience, but I feel like for myself, I have learned, and many of my internal questions of how things work have been answered from this. And although, like, I wish I could carry on the event, I actually just at 8:45 have an exam that's going to open that I have to do. So thank you. And if it weren't for that,
I've got some workshops for students heading into exams. If you just go on the Muslim Counselor, again, I just did a workshop last week on exam stress, and there's also a workshop on stress management. So for you students out there, please use the resources that are there to help.
Absolutely. I know I will be looking into it, because
Good luck in your
use all of that.
May Allah ease your burden for your exams, inshallah.
Inshallah. So with that, I would just like to conclude. I would like to thank Sister Barak for joining us today for this event and being so insightful. And I would like to thank Apps Network for the opportunity to host something like this. And I would like to thank the entire audience of everyone that joined and everyone that helped put this together. And with that said, that should conclude tonight's event. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, sister, so much.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Absa, for putting this together for our students. And inshallah, we can look at different topics specifically for students in the future. Jazakum Allah alif khair. With pleasure. And forgive us for all of our technical issues today.
Yeah, please forgive us for that. Sorry about that.
Alhamdulillah. Take care. Salamu alaikum. And may Allah ease the burden of all of your exams, inshallah. Salamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam. Khuda hafiz, everyone.
Khuda hafiz.